obviously live in a town full of hybrids. We've got your actors, waiters, directors. We've got your actress, models, social media, Kardashian wannabes. But this man is he's a hybrid in the Renaissance sense, I would say. He is, as you just heard, an author. He's a scholar, TV writer, showrunner, producer, activist, pediatrician. So, Neal, I know you're from right, it's incredible. I know you're from a family of doctors. So why don't you tell everybody where you grew up and growing up in this medical family?
I grew up in Denver, Colorado. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I love actors because they are kind of the stand-ins for all of our dreams and desires. And when I was growing up in Denver, Colorado, I had the good fortune of being in the same elementary school as John Wells. So when people ask me, how do you get into Hollywood? You have to grow up with John Wells in Denver, Colorado. And then bump into him in the grocery store, and when he offers you a job on China Beach, you say yes, and when he sends you the script of ER, you say yes, and that's how
But that's not how it, I mean, you started writing for television before you met John Wells.
No,
Well, you met him in school.
No, I knew John when I was in elementary school, and I ran, literally, well, I did one project. I went to AFI, and I went to graduate school in sociology, and one night I went to a party, and somebody talked to me about documentary films, and I just knew that this is what I wanted to do, and I...
You went to medical school, you went to Harvard.
That came later.
Oh.
That came later. So I started making documentaries, and I came out here to go to AFI.
How did your doctor family feel about you being in that world?
Well, my father was happy once I went to Harvard Medical School, so I kind of settled all that. And then he wore the SVU and ER, swag, so he seemed happy at the grocery store in Denver, and people would say, how did you get that? And he'd say, oh, my son is writing for ER. So in the end, I think he was happy that I did both. But I went to AFI after I started making documentaries as a directing fellow, and I always say it's really funny about AFI is that everybody I've worked with at AFI does something that they didn't go to AFI for. So I went as a director, and I'm a writer.
Like law school, right?
Exactly, or the producers are writers, or the writers are directors, or, I mean, that's, there are some who are directors, but my first project was an ABC after-school special with the late Nancy Culp, Miss Hathaway, and the late...
Love Miss Hathaway.
Oh, fantastic. And the late Lynn Thigpen of Carmen Sandiego, and a wonderful actor named Cary Green, who was in Lucas and Goonies, and Kay Lenz. And, I'm very loyal. Cary was in a lot of my shows. Kay was in all of my shows. And so Cynthia Nixon auditioned as a 15-year-old. But then I got to work with her on SVU, and I wrote a part for her, and she won the Emmy. So I felt like, even though I didn't hire her back then, I made up for it. And I wrote and directed an ABC after-school special called Private Affairs.
No, this is before or after law school?
Before medical school.
Medical school.
Before medical school. Right after AFI, I took my little films out. I found an agent, and she said, you're going to have to write if you want to direct. So I had listened to a radio program with Oliver Sacks, who wrote The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat and Awakenings. And I optioned for like $500 a story from The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, and I wrote it and sold it to Paramount. And that was my first big sale.
A book by a neurologist.
Yes.
Like Paramount wanted a book by a neurologist?
Well, they had Awakenings.
You can't? Sorry, okay.
They had Awakenings, and so they liked this, and John Lithgow was attached. It never got made. It's been through many iterations, as we all know, but I got to meet John Lithgow, so that was good. And so my first project was directing and writing an ABC after-school special. That's how I met my one of my dearest friends, Diane Baker, who's here, who, please, if you haven't seen the movie Marnie, for instance, with Diane and Tippi Hedren and Sean Connery, or The Diary of Anne Frank, or I could go on, but Diane was one of the first actors. Silence of the Lambs, of course. Well, everyone has seen that. So, and the Prize with Paul Newman, and Mirage with Gregory Peck. I mean, you know, you can see like I'm a big fan, of course. So I met Diane right when I was doing after school specials, and she, you know, really connected with me and reached out to me and mentored me. So actors have been a huge part of my life from the beginning of my career, and so I so love seeing Diane here. And I've worked with Diane. She was on ER and SVU as well. So I did the after school special, and I wrote the movie for Paramount, and then I literally did run into John Wells in the grocery store with my cart, and he said, hey, come to China Beach. So I said, okay, and I wrote for Dana Delaney and Marg Helgenberger.
Now, was that the first season of China Beach?
No, that was about season 3, I think.
Okay.
And it's great because I worked with Marg on the last year of Under the Dome. So you have these relationships, and I thought, who can I get who can really like make everybody behave? It's like Marg. So it's like, because she's always prepared, brilliant. It's about the work, and you know, people get kind of, like in year 4 of ER, everybody's like, oh, you know, we want to do our own thing. So it's like, who could we get in year 4 of ER to kind of scare everybody? Sally Field and Alan Alda. So it's like, okay, so it's like fantastic. So I've learned. So when I did Designated Survivor this year, I thought, where it's year 3, moving from ABC,
it's being resurrected.
It's
by
being
Netflix.
resurrected. We call it rebooted. So I did it for Netflix, and I didn't do the first 2 years, so I thought, who can I work with and put with Kiefer? Because Kiefer loves fantastic actors, so I immediately thought of, oh, Anthony Edwards, Julie White. So on my show, I have Anthony Edwards and Julie White, and I would watch the dailies, and I just, you know, I worked with Tony Edwards 25 years ago when ER started, and it was just amazing to me to see. He's such a brilliant actor, and to write for him, it's such a gift to write for actors.
So do you feel like you're writing for specific actors? You're not more than creating the character?
Well, it's a combo. So when I was doing, when we were creating new characters for Designated Survivor, I actually had Tony in mind to play the chief of staff. I wanted someone, and you know, when the show opens, when it's dropped by Netflix, and you see Tony walking through the hallways, you kind of feel relieved at the beginning. It's like, oh, there's Dr. Green. I know this show, even though it's a new show. You know, and it's like, I felt like comfortable, like, oh, okay, I feel like, and he comes, and it's a walk and talk like ER, and he knows how to do those because he did millions of them, and he meets all the characters and finally ends up meeting Kiefer at the sort of the opening of our new season. So, you know, and I'd worked with Julie White, who won the Tony for the Little Dog Laughed, and she's incredible, and hired 1, 2, 3 new actors, Elena Tovar, Ben Watson. I mean, it was a real blessing. Lauren Holly is on the show. I'd never worked with her, so I'm always open to...
Netflix is billing this as Designated Survivor by way of ER and SVU.
Well, yes, because Julie was, you know, it's...
And the West Wing.
And the West Wing. Well, because Peter Noah, who was the executive producer after Aaron left on the West Wing, is a writer-producer on the show. And I feel that the show is very much in that mold of, it's very character-driven now. So we really get into 5 of the actors on the show, along with Kiefer, are returning, and then we have 6 new actors. And so I feel like it really kind of, you know, plows through so much character this year in a way. It's very interesting to work on a cable show because I'd never done that versus network. In the old days now of the 90s, when I did ER and the early 2000s of SVU, we weren't hampered in what we could do, and we could do really kind of path-breaking things. And there were a lot of shows that were doing that, like NYPD Blue and LA Law, and in terms of dramas, and Hill Street was one of the starters of that. And even before that, there was, you know, like East Side, West Side, and with George C. Scott. So there were many, The Defenders with E.G. Marshall. So there were many path-breaking shows. But I think now that the business has changed so much, the shows on the networks are somewhat, maybe a little safer. And I don't know that I could do some of the stories that I did on the networks today that I did maybe 10 years ago.
They didn't become safer, though, because cable exists. Cable exists because they became safer, don't you think?
Well, I think they became safer because they're fighting for a much more limited audience. And so they don't want to distress people or, you know, rankle people. And so I think that network shows have become safer shows. And then cable is kind of like, you know, this amazing offering that, you know, I have never, not since ER really, have I had the creative, you know, not the creative ability and just the license to do stories that really push the envelope. So, you know, we have Jamie Clayton, who was on Sense8, who is playing Kiefer's trans sister-in-law. So, you know, we could probably do that on the network, but not do the stories in the way that I'd want to do the stories. So there were no barriers. It was really incredible experience. And it's so funny to see Tony Edwards say fuck, because you never could have that on ER. So it's like, Tony say fuck this, Tony say fuck that, please do that. So it's like,
Netflix
it's like, wow.
told you to do that, right?
It's like Tony says, what the fuck? And it's like, wow, Tony. It's like, you know, I remember one time we said shit on ER, and we had to like negotiate it for like weeks, you know, and it was like one time. And now it's just like, oh, you know, you can say, you know, and we try to do it, we try to parse it and be parsimonious when we do it. But it is a new kind of freedom that I really relish, and I think the actors relish too. I'm not dissing network. It has its place, and it feeds, you know, stories to audiences. But this is really a wonderful opportunity. So I've gone from having this wonderful opportunity with John Wells, whom I ran into in the grocery store, who got me onto China Beach, and then I went to medical school after that. My son was born.
Why?
I just thought, oh, I don't know if I can make it. It's like I was scared, and my son was born, and I thought, you know, I've always wanted to be a doctor. I felt some pressure. I have two brothers who are doctors in Denver. So I thought, well, I'll do that. And I sold a pilot with John Wells the day that I left. And this pilot, it has some resonance for me because it was based on my documentary called Nightlife about people who work all night in Boston, and it used real documentary footage. And I think NBC thought they were buying some kind of like diner show or something, because when they got the script, they were like, they didn't get it. But this was in 1991. So cut to the present, and my show, Designated, now has real documentary footage, and it mixed in with the drama, where I sent out a documentary team I work with, because I make documentaries as well, and they interviewed and got people, and they respond almost sometimes as a chorus, and we try some new things, which, you know, I never let go of that idea.
So when you're writing a medical show like ER, you went to medical school, so you know, clearly have that knowledge mostly at hand. But Designated Survivor is about politics. So how do you dive into that?
Well, since I was the quote, sort of the consultant, I was a staff writer when I started on ER. And John hired me, and I was a fourth-year medical student at Harvard, and I went for 2 months and stayed 7 years. So I just loved it, and it was you know, it's like my life. I was just able to like purge. It's like, oh, I was peed on and puked on by kids. Noah was peed on and puked on by kids. You know, everything that happened, I was able to really do it through Noah. And then I wrote a lot for George because I'm a pediatrician and he's a pediatrician. Right. So I say I'm Doug Ross, you know, and people say, well, what do you mean? And I say, one time George called me down to the set, and this was at Warner Brothers, Stage 11, and it's really great at Warner Brothers. They have plaques now, which they didn't have then, and it tells you what movies were made. So Casablanca was made on our set, and The Pajama Game. So it's like, wow, you know, here's where Doris Day and Carol Chaney and John Raitt were singing, where we were like doing, you know, resuscitations. So it's like, you know, It's kind of crazy to think about.
You were telling me that on ER that John Wells didn't really love interacting with actors so much, but that you really did, and that you think that television writers have, in a way, a closer relationship with the actors than the producers do.
Yes. Well, that's the George story where he called me down to the set, and he said, he had the sides, and he said, Neal, you know, I don't think Doug Ross would say this. And I said, really, George? Well, how do you know? And he said, well, I'm Doug Ross. And I said, well, you know what? I'm Doug Ross too, here and here. And he goes, you are. So I learned from George that there's a symbiotic relationship to the nth degree, and George, I think, has always, that's true, right? Diane did a show with George, right? It's a very, it's collaborative. It's not like, you know, you're done with the script and goodbye. So I learned, and I would go down and I would tell the writers, or the actors, everything that was going to happen. Because they want to know, because they want to finesse their...
You mean in the future of the season?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and John knew it.
Clearly this was not Game of Thrones.
No, but John knew it. No, and it wasn't some other shows I could tell you about, like NYPD Blue. So yes, so we knew, and for the most part, so I could tell George or Eric or Noah or Sherry or Juliana or Tony or Gloria or Laura. It's the first year. You know, this is where we're going, and I think it kind of helped them, at least they always told me it did, that it might have modulated their performance a little to know sort of where they were going, and they weren't going to do something that seemed really, you know, actors hate it when I mean, you all know, you've done a scene and then the writers give you something that's so it's completely antithetical to what they've done before. And so, you know, on Designated Survivor, we watched every episode because we wanted to make sure that we knew the mythology and the lore, and that we were, you know, not changing everything around and saying things that weren't true about whose father was, you know, what somebody's father did or whatever. We wanted it to have that verisimilitude. So I learned early from George Clooney that it was important to have this very collaborative relationship. And, you know, we always hear, or again, you all know best, about the actors-directors relationship. And that's, you know, the directors protect them and the directors have the vision. And I just, at least in television, no. It's the writers, because I'm Olivia Benson. You know, for 11 years, you know, Mariska, I want you to believe that Mariska said those things as Olivia Benson, and it was coming from her heart and soul, but it came from the fantastic writers on Law and Order Special Victims Unit. They're as much Olivia Benson as she is, in a way. She is the embodiment, she's the corporal vision of Olivia Benson, but when I had Mariska do a DNA test and submit it, I read an article somewhere about how if you made it 50%, you could find like maybe other relatives. Nobody was doing that back then. That's how we found all these serial killers now. She swabs her mouth, sends it through, and says that it's, you know, she's looking for a perp. She doesn't say it's her, it's herself. She finds her brother that way. And so it's like, you know, these are all the ideas and the passions and the drive that we have, and we can do that through actors. You know, I wouldn't want to be an actor. I acted once.
And in what context was that? You acted like a doctor.
I was a doctor in a oh my gosh. I remember I told Juliana Margulies, I said, I'm going to audition for a role. As what? She said. I said, as a doctor. And then I told Noah, and he goes, I'm going up for that role. I go, no, it's a different part. So it was called Bread and Roses, and it was directed by the British director Ken Loach.
Oh, yeah.
And
what year was this?
Oh, gosh, 1998, something like that. And it starred Adrian Brody, a fantastic actor from Mexico named Elpidia Carrillo, and George Lopez. And I have a scene, and I saw the director who had won like Palme d'Ors at the con, and I couldn't remember my lines, and I was thinking about high school, acting like, oh, recall of emotion. And it was like, I was just like, trying to like, I was so freaked out. And Adrian Brody was like, and it was like, oh shit, what am I gonna do? And then I saw the director whispering to Adrian like something, and I didn't know what was gonna happen. And then I did the scene again, and Adrian threw me against the wall, and I thought, God, he's gonna beat the hell out of me. And I ran out of the room, and they called cut, and they loved that. So it was true acting, because I was scared he was gonna beat me up. I was an asshole doctor, so it fit the part.
And you did this acting thing, why?
Because Ken Loach wanted a real doctor who knew kind of, I guess, something about acting, and they thought this was interesting. And the casting director, Richard Hicks and Ronnie Yesko, had cast my ABC no, did they cast my after? No, they didn't cast my after school special. They cast my pilot at the WB. Where I got to meet Keith Carradine and find out everything about Nashville. See, this is I could go off on another path. It's like, oh, you know, I love movies, and so it's like, Keith, tell me everything about that scene where you're singing to Shelley Duvall, Lily Tomlin, Geraldine Chaplin. It's like, this is the best.
And what did he say?
He said, wasn't I great? He said, and I said, yes. And I said, what'd you do with your Oscar? Because he won the Oscar for Best Song. He goes, oh, I put it on the hood of my truck. So it's great. So, but you know.
Let's go back to George Clooney.
No, I thought that was wonderful, and you know, you can't do better than Nashville. I mean, it's such an incredible film, and so I get inspired by movies. Like I just watched Vertigo again last night, and I tweeted. I don't tweet that much, but I saw that Entertainment Weekly listed all of the ADAs on SVU, and like the first 5 were ones we created. And like Casey Novak, and Mika Vaughn, played by Paula Patton. Well, Mika Vaughn is an anagram for Kim Novak. So you can see I'm kind of like,
why are you
nutty.
obsessed with Kim Novak?
Because I think she's so interesting. I think she's such an amazing actor. I think Middle of the Night with Frederick March that Patty Chayefsky wrote and Lee Grant is an absolutely beautiful film. I think has a vulnerability that now is finally being appreciated. I think she's great in Picnic opposite
Picnic, one of my
Betty
favorite
Field
movies.
and William Holden. So you have to really watch Kim Novak films and see her now, and it's just, you know, she's really somebody different. She doesn't fit in her skin. And so it's like, you know, I love actors whose personalities are revealed through the characters. And so my obsession with Kim Novak was then translated into making all of the ADAs have Kim Novak names. So there's...
Did she ever know that?
Of course, because Diane and I saw her when they were showing Marnie and Vertigo, and I got to meet her, and I told her, and she's like, really, that's so sweet.
Did she watch the show?
Yes.
Oh, love that.
Yeah. So, you know, I have all my ways. You know, it's like I am such a fan of films, I wanted to meet Piper Laurie, because I love The Hustler. It's like, what's the, you know, can you imagine the scene where... Well, I have a good story about that, too. So,
Here's a good story
so
about
Piper Laurie I wanted to meet because The Hustler's just an incredible film. And she did Days of Wine and Roses with Cliff Robertson when it was a television show first, before it was a movie. And so, and Diane was with, you know, knows Piper, and they came up through the very end of the studio system. So she told me her story of being, her real name is Rosetta Jacobs, and she was told she's Piper Laurie, and she was sat down at Universal next to Bernie Schwartz, who's Tony Curtis, and they said, you're not Jews, you don't talk politics, you're gonna do race car movies. So she told me this story, and that she, you know, got this part, and in The Hustler, and you know, the scene is unforgettable. I mean, I love scenes that puncture us and that we don't forget. And that's the scene. There is when Paul Newman kisses her, and she says, she pushes him away. Can you imagine? She pushes Paul Newman away, and she says, "You're too hungry." I mean, it's like that epitomizes sort of their whole relationship. And great actors make you remember and feel and puncture your heart in a way that Piper did when I watched that, because you know that she wants him, and yet she's an alcoholic, and she can't, and it's just like, it's life. It's encapsulated in this moment. Now, somebody wrote it. I think Robert Rossen wrote it, right? And so, yeah. So somebody wrote it, so that's important. That's why I'm here. But I can't play it. And I learned that when I did that crazy movie for Ken Loach. It's like, no. It's like, I can't do it. But I can write it and think of it. And I've worked with so many great writers that I've been so blessed that their imaginations go deep, and their flaws, my own particularly, can then be articulated through these characters. And so that's been like kind of like in my career, all these actors, like I really wanted to meet Sally Field. So I pitched on ER, I said, we should have Sally play Maura Tierney's mother. And everybody was like, maybe. Do you think she'd do it? It's like, well, let's see. And one night we were doing a scene. I told Entertainment Weekly, they asked me last year, what's my favorite scene? And it's this scene. And
ER.
On ER. Okay. And favorite scene I've ever done. And I wrote. And it's with Maura Tierney and Sally Field. And they're fighting about Thanksgiving and how Sally chased her with a knife, and she was a kid, and she locked herself in the closet. You know,
something straight out of your life. Right?
That was not out of my life. It was out of another writer's life that I soaked up when we were just telling stories, you know. And so, you know, what you do is in the writer's room, which two of our writers are here, they know, that we tell a lot of stories and we absorb each other's stories. So,
I mean, you don't make any of that up?
Well, yeah, we embellish.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and we make things up, but I think so much of it is not made up. At least in my experience of being a doctor, I've heard so many stories that I can bring them to what I'm doing. And so I said to Sally Field, it was 1 a.m. at Warner Brothers, and it was a oneer inside the ER, and she and Maura are fighting, and they go outside to be away from everybody and stand in the rain. And I love it to have it rain. Of course, the actors don't love it because they have to change and dry and go out again and then come back, and it's like, and then they do this side, and they do this master, and they do the coverage. So there was a lot of drying and getting wet again and all of that. And I said to her, you know, I've always wanted to work with you ever since I decided to be a writer. And she said, oh, probably because you saw me as, you know, a kid watching Gidget and Flying Nun. And I said, no. I said, it's because of Norma Ray. I said, oh my God, you stand up there, and it's like, I said, now I want to go back to my computer and start writing again. And she burst into tears. It was so good. Wow. It's like, So it's like, you know, how lucky have I been? You know, so to work with Sally Field or Alan Alda, when I wrote his last episode of ER, when he has Alzheimer's, but he saves a patient because it all comes back to him, and Laura Innes and Noah know that he can't stay, but they also know that he saved the person's life. So you're able to, like, I mean, write for Alan Alda, or write for Jerry Lewis, or write for Jeremy Irons.
Tell me about Jerry Lewis.
Richard Belzer was a huge Jerry Lewis fan. And he said, I think we can get Jerry to play my uncle. Of course, so it's like, he's an actor, so it's like, play my uncle. So I said, okay, Richard, fine. And we called his manager, and they said, yeah, nobody ever calls, so sure. Come in for acting. I mean, this is like towards the end of Jerry's life. I mean, he was not acting in a lot of things. And he said yes, and he was an absolute delight. And he was incredible to, again, talk to and ask him about the Rat Pack and Shirley MacLaine and all the people he'd worked with. It was an incredible experience. So I have found that by going to, I wanted to meet Anne Margaret, because I like Bye Bye Birdie, so I thought,
who doesn't?
Let's see, what do we do? Well, we'll make Anne Margaret, we'll put her in an episode with Jacqueline Smith, the nicest person in the world, Susan Anton and Morgan Fairchild, and we'll make them the mattress beauties from an old 70s commercial. And they'll all be sort of
This
involved.
was on ER?
This was on SVU.
Oh.
And Anne Margaret said, sure. And she won the Emmy. And it was amazing what a lovely person. And then you get to like talk to them. And you know, it's like you get to find out about their lives. And I did that. I wrote to Leslie Caron. And I said, Leslie, dear Ms. Caron, would you please do SVU? And she called me and she said, I'm in Sardinia and I don't have a visa.
And I've never heard of SVU.
And
No,
she's like, yeah, well, you know, it's interesting, but I don't have a visa. So I said, well, we got to find one, and so we got to get one for you. So Universal said, no, you cannot, NBC Universal, you cannot get Leslie Caron a visa in 2 weeks. And I said, no, we have to. So we called, this is a true story, we called Teddy Kennedy's office, the late Senator Kennedy. Mrs. Winterbottom helped us. And she expedited the visa for Leslie, and Leslie came, and I went to New York, and I got there, and they were shooting this scene in the courtroom, and she's telling the truth about what happened to her, and the actor opposite her is the guy who was in The Nanny, Shaughnessy. And he was the bad guy. So it's so nice when people want to play bad guys, Charles Shaughnessy. And she's yelling at him about all the terrible things he did. And I thought, oh my God, Leslie's going to win the Emmy. And she did. And so, because you just I got chills. And it was wonderful. She said when she won, she said, in 1951, I got the Golden Globe for most promising newcomer with Marilyn Monroe, Dean Martin, and Jerry Lewis. And then she paused and said, I think I finally fulfilled my potential. So it was like, she opened up another whole chapter of my life by introducing me to Jack Larson, who played Jimmy Olsen on The Adventures of Superman. And every day growing up in Denver, I had to run from the bus to get home to watch on Channel 7, KLZ TV, The Adventures of Superman. Little did I know, growing up in Denver, this kind of, you know, a little bit sad gay kid who didn't come out till like 6 years ago, that I would meet Jack Larson, who was Montgomery Clift's boyfriend. So that led to a lot of stories. And then James Bridges, who directed Urban Cowboy and China Syndrome and Paper Chase, was his partner. So, you know, actors are an amazing group of people. They have had amazing lives. And I have been very fortunate through these shows to meet incredible people who really know not just about movies, which are important, but about events in time and important political events. And actors get short shrift. We were talking
before, and you said something about intellectual Hollywood, and I said, I've never heard those words together.
Oh. So my friend Diane has told me all about Melvin Douglas and Helen Gahagan Douglas, who was smeared by Nixon. And Diane was their mentee, and Diane was their closest friend. And so Diane lived through that whole experience of Nixon and the end of McCarthyism, the end of the blacklisting, and really Hollywood, you know, the writers and the actors were very close, as what Diane has told me, and the directors, and they shared a lot of beliefs and political viewpoints, and they were very activist. You know, I worked with Robert Vaughn because I loved The Man from U.N.C.L.E. when I was a kid. Yes, he died not too long ago. And I said to him, you know, excuse me, but I went up to him and I said, you know, I'm Neal Baer and this is my show. And he goes, thank you for having me. And I said, I just want you to know. He goes, I know. When you were a kid, you went to your best friend's house, he went to your house, you acted it out the next day, and I was like, how did you know? He goes, because guys your age always tell me that. So I said, wow. I said, you know, what an incredible, you know, gift you gave us, you know, kids growing up, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. But then I also found out what an incredibly interesting anti-Vietnam activist he was. So, and then he told me about Donna Reed doing that. And it's like, Donna Reed doing another Mother for Peace? So, you know, I'm interested, I'm curious. So you know, actors are not just people you give a script to and they say lines. They bring that's why I've been so lucky, they bring their passions as well. And I think, you know, you do get short shrifted, is that I don't know if that's a term, about, you know, your experiences. And that's why I've been so lucky to meet this, such a wide range of amazing actors. And people I've wanted, I called Carol Burnett and I said, through her manager, but then she got on the phone and I said, we really want you to do the show. And she said, well, what
Special
part,
victims.
SVU, what part would I play? And I said, well, you kill a lot of men, but they're really bad. They're all like kind of your ex-husbands, but they all have done horrible things. She said, I'm in. And then I said, now, I want you to be a dancer, like a rockette. And did you ever dance on the Gary Moore show? And she said, oh, not well, but I did dance with Carol Haney and Gwen Verdon. So we went to some place that finds old footage, and we found the scene. And if you watch the SVU, it's kind of our homage to Sunset Boulevard. She's in a turban and she's watching herself on screen dance with, I think it was Gwen Verdon. So you get to as this kid growing up, I told my music teacher years later, I said we sang all the songs from Carousel, and we sang songs from Gigi, and I said, I never dreamed, I did not have aspirations to go to Hollywood when I was growing up outside of Denver, Colorado. But I was dreamy, and I loved movies because I felt like I still cry at the end of Breakfast at Tiffany's because I wanted to be, a straight guy and get Audrey Hepburn, but, it all worked out in the end. So I told him I never dreamt that I'd work with Shirley Jones or Leslie Caron. It was just not anything I ever imagined. And so now I think back on it and I see myself sitting there singing If I Loved You, and then I see the movie with Shirley Jones and Gordon McRae, and I think, how lucky have I been?
I looked it up this weekend, and I watched SVU all the time, but I realized that having a guest spot on SVU was a cult thing, and there are actually like ratings of them. So let's talk about some of those other ones, like getting Jeremy Irons to do network TV, which he certainly never done.
Well, I made him a sex therapist opposite one of my favorite actors, Elizabeth Mitchell, who played Laura Innes. I outed Laura Innes' character on ER. My last episode before I left, I made her a lesbian, and I made Elizabeth Mitchell her girlfriend. So I was like, let me bring Elizabeth Mitchell on again, and she played opposite Jeremy, and he did 2 episodes. He agreed to do 2, and he was amazing. He was just, the best actors in the world.
But why did he do it? Just he thought the part was interesting?
I learned early on, too, from when we had Sally Field and Alan Alda on, a double Oscar-winning actor, a multi-Emmy-winning actor, that it's the material. You all know that. And so it's like they didn't care. And that was before cable, where everybody will do cable now. So we had major stars do our show because they liked the part. And that's why Carol Burnett came on, or wonderful people that you may not know and hear as well, like Brenda Blethyn, who's been Oscar nominated, said, oh my gosh, I would love to work opposite Mike Farrell and Clea Duvall. This sounds amazing. Or the late Luke Perry said, yeah, I'll work with Sarah Gilbert. I've never worked with Sarah Gilbert. And that was, I also tried to do that. I tried to put people together whom, you can't imagine that Luke Perry would have worked with Sarah Gilbert, but he did on our show. Or I said, we had Angela Lansbury on opposite Alfred Molina, the great actor, and Angela Lansbury beyond. And I thought, we have this community organizer. Who would be so interesting? Who do I want to meet?
So you don't think of the actor and then think of the part. You write the part, the story, and then you think of the actor.
Sometimes. But I thought, who did I want to meet? I want to meet Rita Morano. So she played the part. But I did write Leslie's part for Leslie Caron. I wrote Anne Margaret's part for Anne Margaret. I wrote Christine Lottie's storyline for Christine Lottie. I wrote Jeremy Irons' part we had before. We had him in mind. And I would go to the theater and I'd see Bug with Michael Shannon. And I said, who is that? Let's get him on the show. And he did the show. I saw a young woman walk in to our casting who'd never worked before. And I said to our casting director, Jonathan Strauss, who is this? And he said, oh, her name's Patricia. And I said, there's something about her that's just different. It's like, well, let's see how she reads. And so she read, and we're like, let's cast her. So we gave Patricia her first part. But you would know her as Rooney Mara. So she came in, and, you know, it's just so fun. A young actor came in, and I said, again, it's like, wow, gave this amazing reading. And his name, first thing he did, his name is Lee Pace. So we gave him his first part. I believe we gave Laverne Cox her first part when she came in. Michael Pitt early on. Abigail Breslin, Mariska came on the set, and the director said to Abigail, she was like 5 or 6 years old, and he said, now I just want you to cry out of this eye right here. And Mariska was like, you cannot tell a child to do that. And I said to Mariska, wait. Because Mariska hadn't really met her yet. I said, wait. And so Mariska does the scene with her, and she does exactly that. So Mariska called her Little Merle at that point. But you know, you just meet actors at various points.
Tell me the Viola Davis story.
I went to a play with, so I have two good play stories. So I went to a play called Intimate Apparel around 2001, and I saw this actor who just stunned me. And I said to Julie Tucker, who cast our show then, and she cast my show now, so again, loyalty plays, and they're all so good. I said, who is that? And she said, well, her name is Viola Davis, and she's done a lot of theater. And I said, oh, we need to have her on the show. So she was on SVU. She played a defense attorney in about 10 episodes. And lovely and amazing. And then she came back some years later, just as a favor to us to do it. And one time I saw a play with Juliana Margulies and Donald Sutherland and an actor named Justin Kirk. And I was blown away by Justin Kirk. And I put him on SVU. And I got a call, and my assistant said, there's a guy named Mike Nichols on the phone. Do you know Mike Nichols? And I said, Mike Nichols? Like, Mike Nichols? And I said, and he goes, well, I'll ask. And I said, no, don't ask. It's like I'll talk. It's like I don't know any Mike Nichols. So I said, hello? And it's like, hello, this is Mike Nichols, and I watched your show last night. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like The Graduate and Working Girl. And it's like, you did? And he's like, yes, and there's a young man who was on it, and he like does Suicide by Cop with Mariska. And who is that? And I said, his name is Justin Kirk. And he goes, can you send me a tape? We had still tapes, I think, then. So we did. So he was cast as the lead in Angels in America.
He's the lead in Angels in America.
Yeah, so you just don't know, right? So.
Let's go back to, again, George Clooney. You told me a great story about, well, I don't want to blow the punchline, but how he won his Emmy.
Well, he was nominated for his first Emmy. He didn't win, but you know, he won an Oscar later, so it's okay. So in year one, I wrote an episode, a Christmas episode, which I loved doing, and it was my first episode alone, really writing. I had done co-written 2 episodes before that, and I had Rosemary Clooney on because I had had a patient who had Alzheimer's, who was an opera singer, and she would wander the hall singing. So I said to George, do you think your aunt would do the show and play a woman who's a jazz singer who has Alzheimer's? And he said, yeah, she'll do anything, you know. It's like, and so then, of course, Rosemary Clooney, she said, Neal, watch this. George, get me some food from over there. She's like, I'm the one who can like tell him what to do. So it was great. And I'll never forget, I had her sing Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, and we cleared out the set. And I started to walk away, and she said, these are just the moments that you treasure forever. And she said, where are you going? And I said, well, I know they're going to record you. And she goes, oh, no, I need someone to sing to. And she took out a pitch pipe out of her pocket, blew it, and she sang Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas to me, which is what she sings on the show. And I was like, wow, this is like, I really have gone to heaven. So there was a Christmas party, and I put George in a tuxedo. And, you know, it's a very sad episode, and there's our transplant, and Cynthia Ettinger, a wonderful, wonderful actor, plays the waitress in it, and she did a number of SVUs as well. And she's just so heartbreaking because she wants to believe that her husband will live, and ultimately they take him off of life support. And they're sending the organs away as Rosemary Clooney singing "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas." And what did people tell me? Oh, we love George in a tuxedo.
He does really look good in a tuxedo.
All right, so I said, okay, fine. So I drew the lucky straw, year 2, to write George's. Year 1, we did a show for Tony Edwards called Love's Labor Lost, where he delivers a baby in the ER and the mother dies. And it scared people I heard pregnant women were scared for years after seeing that episode. So I thought, what do I do for George that could kind of equal that, but it has to be different? And I thought, well, I'll put him in a tuxedo and have him save a kid who's drowning in a tunnel. And then he'll be the reluctant hero. So I wrote that, and George was an action hero in a tuxedo, and he looked great. Now, he was nominated for an Emmy, but he didn't win. I don't remember who won that year. But I then thought, Mariska's getting nominated a lot, and let's see, if I put Mariska in a black cocktail dress, this is true, and I have her save a kid, but she can't save a kid in a tunnel, so she could save a little girl who's locked in a room and whose phone is running out of juice, and we could have Mariska in 3 acts just talking on the phone. This was also inspired by Ted Kotcheff, a great director, did Weekend at Bernie's, the original Fun with Dick and Jane, the First Blood Rambo, and he had done a television movie with Ingrid Bergman called The Human Voice, where she's on the phone the whole time. So I said, I watched it because Ted showed it to me, and I said, let's put Mariska on the phone for all the acts except for the last act with this little girl, and have her tell nursery rhymes but she's going to be in a black cocktail dress and look absolutely smashing because she's supposed to go on a date. Dick Wolf is like, why is she wearing a cocktail dress? And I was like, because she's going to win the fucking Emmy is why. And the Golden Globe.
Nice.
So, you got to take your characters out of the everyday, the quotidian, and that was what I learned with George. And George, George was like, yeah, put me in a tuxedo. And that's I sent him to, he was supposed to go to the opera, and then he saves the kid because the little kid has
Giorgio Armani must have watched that episode.
It's just so I learned, these little tricks. So with Mariska, it did work because she did win. And I made it work because she was going on a date. Now, I think I said to Mariska, just get whatever you want, and if it's Carolina Herrera or whatever. So it was kind of a pretty fancy cocktail dress. But
you get to keep it?
Yes, of course. She won the Emmy.
Right. Here you are, clearly the happiest guy in the world, and a delight, obviously. But you wrote some dark shit. And there you are on ER, indulging in stories of death and tragedy. And then SVU is all dark sex crimes. How does a guy as happy as you are go into that dark place and then come out and be happy again?
Well, I'm just innately curious about people. And so I think that's why I started out in graduate school in sociology. And it didn't work for me to be an academic. That's why I started into making documentaries. So, I think I did make a pact. We did an episode where a mother hits her kid on the head with a frying pan, and he has this proclivity for foot fetishes and cutting off women's feet. And I said, we are not going to ever show anything and Margaret Collin, who just did Carousel, was the wonderful, wonderful actor, was in that episode. And I said, we showed too much, and I'm not going to do that anymore. So I learned that early on. And it's we don't have to be graphic and gruesome. We have to get into the hearts of people. So that's what I did on SVU. So, we live with tragedy all the time, but I think our role as a writer and as an actor is to play out the hope, the fears, the anger, the pettiness, all of the human emotions. And so I don't necessarily see SVU as like just dark or gruesome because I didn't want it to be graphic. I think we shot a gun. I know Mariska shot Justin Kirk's character. Maloney shot at his last episode, somebody, and maybe one other time. So it was never about that. It was about the peeling off the layers of our characters through the issues they were dealing with. So if we did an episode about euthanasia, we'd see Benson's perspective, which would be very different from Stabler, because Stabler had 5 kids, and so he was more empathetic with, this was Elizabeth Mitchell and Judd Hirsch during that episode. And Belzer was devout Jew, so he said, no way would you ever allow, a child suffering to be euthanized, and Ice-T was like on the fence. So it's really like an amazing way of grappling with human issues, and that's what I love about Designated Survivor. So every character, be it Italia Ricci or Cal Penn or Tony Edwards, whose character is married to Lauren Holly, or Ben Watson and Elton E. Williams, or Jamie Clayton and Kiefer and Maggie Q and Chuck Iwuji, they all have stories that are not just, attempting to stop a tsunami or something. They're not crisis. And that's sort of where, for me, where networks have gone, is there's sort of like, there's a crisis of the week. This is really digging into their characters this year, and we find out who they are. The reason it's like ER and West Wing and SVU is that we find out who they are by the political issues they're dealing with. Will they lie? Will Kiefer tell the truth? How much does he want to win? Can he swim in a muddy stream and not get dirty? So these are questions that we pose, and then we go and try to answer them. But we really grapple with, the internal issues. We have this wonderful storyline with Aidan Canto and Elena Tovar about, how far does one go in passing, they're both Latino, in passing to run for office and hold back their own political views, or not be, for Elena's character, too much Latina. So it's like, we're allowed to do things that I just couldn't have imagined being able to do a couple years ago. And it's so gratifying, but it's about life, and it's not easy, and it's messy, and people lie, and they do things that you sometimes think are unforgivable, but then they do things that surprise you. And what better way to do that than through television? And how fortunate have I been, as I've been telling you stories about all these actors I've gotten to work with. I was so lucky when we went to Gloria Rubin in year 2 of ER, and we said to her, would you do a storyline that really wasn't, this was 1994, so it's before antiretrovirals or treatment for HIV. And we said, will you play an HIV-positive character? And she said, yes, but I don't want to die a bad death. And she had people, and she said this, relatives who had died of AIDS. And we said, we won't do that. And then the next year, or around that time, the treatment changed everything. And so we were the first show to explore this storyline. And it really took a lot of guts on her part to do this incredibly difficult story, where we really didn't know a lot, like we do now about transmission and all that, and things like that. And so she and Michael Beach did it. And it was just an amazing act of courage on both their parts to do a storyline that, wasn't something that a lot of people would want to do. And so, I have a lot of deep respect and gratitude, particularly for Gloria, and allowing us to do it, and playing that part. And then what was great is after she left the show, because she went to sing as a backup singer and dancer for Tina Turner, so she got that gig, and it was great, and she's a wonderful singer, and she was in the movie Lincoln, and she's done a lot of great work since. But I did call John, and we're still very close friends, and I said, will you please bring Gloria back in year 14 of ER, to show the audience that Jeannie Boulet has lived a really fulfilling and healthy life? And he said, yeah, sure. And he did. And it was just, to me, that was one of the best moments for me with John and ER, that we were able to show a character years later, that audiences think that Mariska is Olivia, and we want them to. And we want them to think that Clooney is Doug Ross. And that's why these shows are big hits, because there's also something in them that is charismatic and attractive. And so I think it's wonderful when we're able to go years later, literally like 8 years later, and show that Jeannie's, people wonder, yes, she's fiction, but she's not fiction.
I want to, before we leave, I want people to know that aside from your incredible achievements, that you're also an activist on behalf of children. And tell me about this program you did in Africa.
Well, I did 2 projects. I taught mothers with HIV photography so that they could, and they ended up disclosing their status through their work. And then we gave scholarships to 2 women who really were talented, and they became photographers. And I do it with an organization in town here called Venice Arts, where we teach kids photography and filmmaking. And then I met a young man in Mozambique, in Maputo, and I taught him how to shoot. And he was an orphan. I met him at an organization called Reencontro, and it was for orphans, because there's no AIDS orphans. There's no foster care or orphanages in many countries in Africa. They don't have the infrastructure. So if you don't have the family members to take care of you, you live on the garbage dump. So he was looking for someone to take care of him. He was 16, and he finds an elderly woman in a wheelchair, and in exchange for pushing her to church, she gave him a place to sleep, and then we ultimately found his brother. So it's called Home is Where You Find It. So he shot it, and I left the camera in Mozambique with him for 3 months, and people were like, but he really took care of it, and he ended up going to the African Leadership Academy, and now he's a filmmaker. And so, I work with Venice Arts, so we're doing a project now called First Vote, where we're working with kids who are going to vote for the first time, and they're doing their own documentaries about why it's important to vote and what they're looking for and what they want out of a president or a congressperson.
Help us.
Yes, really well. Well, that's, they're going to do these docs, so it's, stories change. I really do believe that, the only way to change, things for the better is through storytelling. Because stories can melt hardened hearts. You take your own life and you see it on screen. You take the template of your own life and you apply it to what you're seeing. And I've had, many encounters with people where they say, I really believe this. I could say like Modern Family had a huge impact on Will and Grace on, passing gay marriage. People see that other people who may not be like them or they're afraid of are people themselves just like they are. And so that's what storytelling is about, and that's why actors are so beloved. Because
that's why we are actors.
Exactly. So that's why, and they are the stand-ins for ourselves and our dreams, our hopes, our desires, our anger, So, yeah. So I'm the CEO. So, right? So Cameron and Josh are here, and they work on the show. So I'm the CEO, so I hire the writers, the actors, the directors, the editors, run the writer's room, do any rewrites, work with the studio, which, can be, great or not. Work with a network, which could be great or not. In my case, has been fantastic. And it has been my whole career, actually. I've been really fortunate because, I was at NBC Universal. Well, I was at Warner Brothers and NBC for 7 years and NBC Universal for 11 years. It's like, I had two jobs for 18 years. So I ran ER the last year I was there, and then I ran SVU the whole time. So it's really like, and it's my vision. So I went to Netflix and I said, I really want Maggie Q's Conspiracy to be, and don't say Josh or Cameron. And so that's what we're doing. And so it's my vision, but shaped and collaboratively to the nth degree by the other writers and the actors too, and Kiefer. So I met a lot with Kiefer, which was great, to talk to him about where did he think his character was going. So it's a lot of dialogue. It's not like we are the writers and you just, you know, and there are shows like that, and we write it, you do it, and that's that. And so that's not what we do. I mean, we do want them to be, you know, to the writers to be, or the actors to be, you know, on script, but we do notes with them. But it is like the CEO, and so I do all the cuts. And then I work with the network, so we do our cut, and the director has his or her cut first. And then what's great about TV is then we go in and we do our thing, and we improve it, and or we embellish it, and then but we bring in the directors too, and it's collaborative because we had 4 directors on our show for the 10 episodes, which is also great because they really know. We had 2 directors who did 7 episodes, Chris Grismer and Peter Lito. So it's great for the actors. It's like they know the actors know them, and they really know the style, and it's not like you have to like do tone meetings. So it's running a big corporation with lots of people, and I hire the casting director, the wardrobe person, but the heads of the departments hire their own people. So I go with people I've worked with. So Tommy Burns did ER for 15 years as the line producer. Come over, Tommy. And you know, I worked with Don DeNoon and Adam Stein writing on SVU, and so they came on board. And then I hired new writers, Ricardo Perez Gonzalez, Kendra Chapman, and it's a great job. It can be really stressful, but I've learned over the years to kind of, now I'm not going to look at Cameron and Josh, to be less stressed, right? Right? You know, so it's really, it's a wonderful job.
It pays well, doesn't it?
It can. You know, so yeah.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Neal.